It's a simple concept, just revenues minus costs equals returns. First of all, let's look at the revenue side of things. If you're looking at an existing enterprise, you should use price projection based on what your best guess of your upcoming year's price should be. If you're already growing that particular crop or livestock, you probably know what that price is, or you have a good idea, or you have resources, either professional resources or other farmers or contract information in order to determine that price. And also, as far as yields, if you're already growing the particular enterprise, you have a good idea what your average yield is. If you're projecting, looking forward to maybe to growing a particular enterprise, then you need to research that and find out what's the long-term price. Not only is what's next year's price, but if you're going to make some investment of your time, labor, your energy to get into a new enterprise, you need to look at what that long-term price will be, not only the next year's price, and use a longer-term price as far as looking at profitability for your farm. And yields, that's a really critical thing, to look at a reasonable yield. If someone's been growing, we'll use watermelons because that's the example I'm using today, has been growing watermelons for 10 years, they've got it down pretty well, and they're going to consistently, if they're a good grower, going to be consistently growing a good yield. If you're just starting out, you're probably going to have some pitfalls and should project a lower yield than an experienced grower. So be common sense about this. And there's quite a bit of information around on your particular crop. You may not have the information from University of Idaho, but you can look from other universities, grower associations, and such to find that information. Variable input costs are pretty easy to find. Those are, again, the costs that change, or they're dependent on how much you grow. If you don't grow anything, you won't have any variable costs. And you can find around these prices. U of I publishes a price guide, input price guide from survey data. Other states publish that, so you can find in your particular crop, there's some information published about those. Or you can just call the vendors and ask them, excuse me, what will be the input price for fertilizer for my particular crop. So the format of an enterprise budget, something like this, starts out with the name of the enterprise. In our case, we're going to use an example of watermelons. And in published titles, those names will provide usually some additional information. Let's say it's a cow-calf operation. It may say 100 it'll say cow-calf operation, then it'll say 100 cow herd. So it gives you some idea of the size. The prices will be different on a 100 cow herd versus a 500 cow herd. It might say for a winter wheat enterprise, it might say that is a direct seed winter wheat budget versus a conventional winter wheat budget. So it might give an indication of the production system used. Another thing it might say, for instance, would be an irrigated wheat budget, which would give an indication of some of the inputs used. So the name gives some information about the budget. So we begin with the name of the budget, and then our first item of the budget is the income, yield by the price. We just talked about that. And then the variable costs are subtracted from that, and the variable costs are those inputs that vary according to the amount we produce, equals the gross margin. And the gross margin is the returns over variable costs. If those gross margins are positive, that gives an indication that the enterprise is contributing to the financial health of the farm, at least covering some of the fixed costs, because those fixed costs, you're going to have those costs regardless if you're producing or not producing. Those costs of depreciation, interest, um, insurance, even repairs. I've got some combines that have been sitting up at we haven't farmed grain since 1998, and they are totally broken down. They just sit there and they break down. So repairs are required to maintain, even if you're not producing, you still have repairs. So if you are making a positive gross margin, you're at least contributing to the fixed costs. So gross margin minus those fixed costs, and we try to allocate the fixed costs to the enterprise. I'm going to talk more in a minute how to accomplish that specifically, because I want you to really be able to use these budgets. I just got to make sure I'm watching my clock here so I don't go over. And then you'll have a fixed cost, which will give you the bottom line accounting or bottom line profit. The word accounting is used to distinguish from a economic profit, which is really beyond the scope of our discussion here today, but the bottom line profit measure from the enterprise budget. This is a sample enterprise budget for watermelons. I doubt, well, maybe somebody out there grows watermelons. It's possible. I love watermelons, so we should. That's why I maybe picked it. You can see the revenue there. That's 250 hundredweight at $5.50 per hundredweight. And then typical variable costs: seed, fertilizer, chemicals, machinery expense. And those machinery expenses, we're going to talk about how to record those and how to keep track of those. But those are the variable expenses, which will be fuel, oils, lubes, that type of thing. Repairs that take place from using machinery on this enterprise. Spraying, harvesting, hauling, labor, and then interest to give you your total of fixed costs, or excuse me, variable costs in this situation, $1,193.22. And you'll see that that income is positive. Income above variable cost, $181.78, is positive. So this enterprise is contributing towards the fixed costs. And that's a good sign that it's a good enterprise for the farm. The next, if you look at the fixed costs, you see machinery, depreciation, interest, taxes, insurance. Some people call that dirty. You can remember it: depreciation, interest, taxes, or repairs, taxes, and insurance. Dirty. That's just a little acronym to help you remember those fixed costs. And then a land charge. Land charge can be calculated by an actual, if you're actually paying a rental fee for your land. If you own your land, and you can calculate by what the land is worth and then some kind of economic return on that investment. You can use that to use for a land charge. But the land charge should be included because if you weren't using this land for this, you would be using it for another alternative use. So to be fair, you need to include a land charge. And that gives you your total fixed costs. So the total cost of raising watermelons, $1,355.22, estimated profit of $19.78. These numbers aren't as important as what they represent. That $19.78 is a return to the owner's labor, which it hasn't been calculated. That labor up there is paid labor in the variable costs. That the labor is paid labor. So it's a return to the owner's labor, risk, the risk that the owner bears of watermelon getting hailed out or split open because of the weather. The owner bears that risk. And then also the owner's management skills. That's what the 1978 represents. A little bit about the different cost estimations in order to come up with the variable costs for buildings and particular machinery does represent some challenges because if you're very good at maintaining records, perhaps you may be able to say, well, I spent 40 hours of tractor time on uh, this particular enterprise, but I spent 20 hours on raising carrots. Well, that'd be great but most farmers aren't that great of record keepers, and most people aren't that great of record keepers, and they only keep the amount of records they absolutely have to keep, and particularly in a busy production season, it's hard to keep those type of records. So there are some other places we can look for machinery costs, um, because machinery costs are a significant part of these budgets. And we already talked a little bit about the different costs related to machinery. But to come up with those machinery costs, there are some resources you can use. I meant to take that slide out. Okay, a lot of states publish custom rate guides, and it's a temptation to use those and they are a pretty good source of information for machinery costs. For instance, if you're grazing hay, you can go to that publication of custom rate guide. Idaho does publish one of those, and you can look at swathing and say, well, if they charge $12 an acre, that's what I'm going to use for my cost for swathing. The problem is that the people who go into custom operations, they're running their machinery over a lot of acres. They're more efficient. They go into it because they're very good at swathing. So they're more efficient operators, or they might be discounting the prices in order to get either more business or discounted price because they aren't there when, if you own your own machinery, you would be running your swather. They're not there perfect timing. So usually they're a little bit low. They're to use for your own costs, but they're a starting place if you don't have any other information available. Different states publish machinery cost estimates, and they'll say, for instance, a 6-bottom moldboard plow, and then they'll give the fixed costs and the variable costs to run that moldboard plow based on a certain number of hours of use or acres of use. That's another good place to get information. But the best place is to maintain your own information. The cost of using fuel, oil, and lube is fairly easy to come up with. The cost of actually paying for the tractor and the depreciation and insurance on the tractor, a little more difficult to come up with, particularly if you run several enterprises, but possible to do. The better records you keep, the more information you're going to be able to use to build your enterprise budget. A couple more exceptions I want to mention. For perennial crops like alfalfa, grass hay, orchards, vineyards, it's because they're perennial crops. The way we usually do it with alfalfa and grass hay is to create separate budgets. So an establishment budget, that would be the cost of seeding and the first year of getting the crop in the ground, getting the crop up. Sometimes there's not a crop that year harvested in the first year of, let's say, alfalfa, or a diminished crop because it's the first year for the crop. Or maybe there's a nurse crop that